The wagon wheel hit another rut in the dusty road, and Katherine Sullivan gripped the wooden seat harder as her precious cargo shifted behind her, the carefully wrapped pottery pieces clinking softly against their straw padding despite her best efforts to secure them. She had traveled 3 weeks from Ohio to reach Empire City, Colorado, a town promising opportunity for those brave enough to seek it in the summer of 1878. And the last thing she needed was to arrive with a wagon full of broken dreams and shattered clay. The mountains rose in the distance like ancient sentinels, their peaks still crowned with snow despite the July heat that made her cotton dress stick to her back. Katherine wiped her forehead with her sleeve and clicked her tongue at the tired mare pulling her wagon. The animal had been faithful through the entire journey, and Katherine promised herself she would find the beast the finest stable and sweetest hay once they reached town. Empire City appeared on the horizon just as the sun began its descent toward those magnificent peaks. The town sprawled across a valley larger than Katherine had expected, with wooden buildings lining dirt streets and the distant sound of a train whistle echoing through the thin mountain air. Her heart quickened. This was it, her fresh start. Her chance to build something meaningful with her own 2 hands. She had learned the potter's craft from her grandmother, a woman who believed that shaping clay was like shaping destiny, that patient hands could transform something ordinary into something beautiful. After her grandmother's death and the dissolution of Katherine's brief engagement to a man who wanted a wife but not a woman with ambitions, she had sold everything she owned and headed west where the world was still being formed, still malleable like wet clay on a wheel. Katherine guided the wagon down the main street, taking in the saloons, the general store, the land office, and what appeared to be a decent hotel. Men in dusty work clothes and cowboy hats turned to watch her pass, their curiosity evident but not threatening. Women in plain dresses hurried about their business, some pausing to nod politely at the newcomer. She found the livery stable near the edge of town, a large structure that smelled of hay and horses and honest work. A boy of perhaps 15 emerged from the shadows, eyeing her wagon with interest. "Help you, miss?" he asked, pushing back his hat. "I need boarding for my mare and a recommendation for lodging," Katherine said, climbing down from the wagon seat with as much grace as she could muster after hours of travel. "Mrs. Henderson runs a boarding house 2 streets over, clean rooms and good meals," the boy said, already moving to help unhitch her horse. "You planning to stay in Empire City long?" "Permanently if things work out," Katherine replied, stretching her stiff back. The boy's eyes widened with interest. "We do not get many single ladies settling here permanent-like. What brings you to Colorado?" Katherine walked to the back of her wagon and carefully pulled back the canvas covering, revealing rows of pottery pieces, plates and bowls and vases, each one painted with delicate designs of flowers and birds and geometric patterns. "I am a potter. I plan to open a shop." The boy whistled low. "Those are mighty fine. Never seen anything like that around here. Most folks use tin plates and such." "Then perhaps they would appreciate something more beautiful," Katherine said with a small smile. She paid the boy for a week's boarding and directions to Mrs. Henderson's establishment, then carefully loaded her most precious pieces into a smaller crate she could carry. The rest would stay locked in the wagon until she found proper premises for her shop. Mrs. Henderson proved to be a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes and capable hands. She took one look at Katherine's dusty clothes and weary face and immediately offered her the best room in the house, a corner space with 2 windows and a small table perfect for working. "You look dead on your feet, dear," Mrs. Henderson said, leading Katherine up the narrow stairs. "I will have my girl bring up hot water for washing and supper will be ready in an hour. Nothing fancy, just stew and bread, but it is filling. That sounds like heaven, Katherine admitted, setting down her crate with a grateful sigh. True to her word, a young woman appeared shortly with a pitcher of steaming water and clean towels. Katherine washed away the layers of dust and changed into her one good dress, a deep blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. She unpinned her auburn hair, brushed it thoroughly, and repinned it in a neat bun at the nape of her neck. Looking at her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand, she saw a woman of 22 years with determined eyes and capable hands. She looked like someone who could build a life from nothing but will and clay. Supper was served family-style in Mrs. Henderson's dining room, with Katherine joining 3 other boarders, 2 miners who worked claims in the nearby mountains, and a traveling salesman passing through on his way to Denver. They were polite company, asking the usual questions about where she came from and what brought her west. Katherine answered honestly, watching their faces shift from skepticism to interest when she described her craft. "My wife would love something pretty like that," one of the miners said wistfully. "She complains all the time about how plain everything is out here. Says she misses the nice things from back east. When I have my shop established, please bring her by," Katherine said warmly. "I would be happy to show her what I have." That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in weeks, Katherine listened to the sounds of Empire City settling down for the evening. Piano music drifted from one of the saloons. A dog barked in the distance, and somewhere a baby cried before being soothed. She felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. What if no one wanted to buy her pottery? What if she had traveled all this way only to fail? But no, she told herself firmly, pushing away the doubts. Her grandmother had not taught her this craft only to see it wasted. Katherine would make this work through sheer determination if nothing else. The next morning, she set out to find suitable premises for her shop. Empire City had grown quickly during the silver boom, and while some buildings stood empty as fortunes shifted, others were being constructed at a rapid pace. Katherine walked the main street with a critical eye, looking for the right location, something visible but affordable, with enough space for her wheel and kiln. She found it at the corner of Main Street and 4th, a small building that had previously housed a seamstress who had recently moved to a larger space. The front room had good light from 2 large windows, and the back room was spacious enough for her equipment. The owner, a banker named Mr. Pritchard, quoted her a monthly rent that made her wince, but was not impossible if she was careful with her remaining funds. "I will take it," Katherine said, extending her hand to shake on the deal before her courage could falter. Mr. Pritchard looked surprised but pleased. He shook her hand firmly and promised to have the keys ready by afternoon, along with the lease papers for her to sign. Katherine spent the rest of the day taking inventory of what she needed. The building was empty except for some rough shelving left behind by the previous tenant. She would need her wheel and kiln transported from the wagon, proper shelving for displaying finished pieces, a work table, a stove for heat during the cold months, and supplies, clay, glazes, fuel for the kiln, and 100 other small necessities. Her funds were limited, but Katherine had always been resourceful. She negotiated with the livery boy to help move her equipment in exchange for one of her decorative vases. She purchased lumber from the mill at the edge of town and spent 2 days building simple but sturdy shelves. She scrubbed the floors and windows until they gleamed, hung curtains she sewed herself from cheap muslin, and arranged her existing pottery pieces to best advantage. The wheel and kiln were the most challenging items to move. The wheel was manageable if heavy, but the kiln required careful handling and a stone base to prevent fire hazards. Katherine hired 2 men from the saloon to help, paying them what she could afford and promising future discounts on her wares. By the end of her first week in Empire City, Katherine's shop was beginning to take shape. She painted a simple sign for the window announcing Sullivan Pottery Fine Ceramics and Custom Orders in careful black letters. She arranged a small display in the front window with 3 of her best pieces: a vase painted with columbines, a set of plates decorated with geometric patterns, and a large bowl glazed in deep blue with touches of gold. It was while she was adjusting this window display, standing on a crate to reach the top shelf, that she first met Matthew O'Brien. She did not see him at first, focused as she was on positioning the vase just right to catch the afternoon light. But she felt his presence, that peculiar awareness of being watched. Katherine turned her head and found herself looking down at a man standing on the boardwalk, his attention fixed not on the pottery but on her hands. He was tall, lean in the way of men who work physically every day, with sun-darkened skin and light brown hair that curled slightly beneath his worn cowboy hat. He could not have been much older than her, perhaps 25, with a strong jaw shadowed by a few days' growth of beard and eyes the color of amber in sunlight. But it was his expression that caught her attention, a look of such focused intensity, as though her hands moving across the pottery held some answer to a question he had been asking all his life. Katherine stepped down from the crate, smoothing her apron self-consciously. She opened the door, and the small bell she had hung that morning chimed sweetly. "Can I help you?" she asked. The cowboy seemed to shake himself from some reverie. He removed his hat, revealing more of that light brown hair, and offered a slight bow that seemed more natural than practiced. "Apologies, miss. Did not mean to stare," he said, his voice rough from disuse or dust or both. "I was watching your hands, how they moved, like they knew exactly what they were doing without you having to think about it." Katherine felt heat rise to her cheeks, though whether from embarrassment or pleasure at the observation she could not say. "I have been working with clay since I was a child. I suppose it becomes second nature after a while. You the potter, then? The one folks been talking about?" he asked, his eyes finally moving from her hands to her face. "I am Katherine Sullivan," she confirmed. "And you are Matthew O'Brien. Folks mostly call me Matt. I work horses, breaking and training, mostly for the ranches around here, but some private sales too." "A pleasure to meet you, Mr. O'Brien," Katherine said formally, though something in his direct gaze made her feel anything but formal. Matthew shifted his weight, turning his hat in his hands. "Miss Sullivan, this might sound strange, but would you teach me?" Katherine blinked in surprise. "Teach you pottery? I know it is not usual work for a man, and I have got my own trade with the horses," he said quickly, the words coming faster now as though he needed to get them out before his courage failed. "But I watched your hands in that window, shaping and smoothing, creating something from nothing. And I thought about how I spend my days breaking things, breaking the wild out of horses, breaking their spirits sometimes even when I try not to. I thought maybe I would like to learn how to create something instead, to make something instead of just breaking things down." There was such honesty in his words, such unexpected vulnerability, that Katherine found herself nodding before she had fully considered the implications. "I have never taught anyone before," she admitted, "but I suppose I could try if you are serious about learning." "I am serious about most things, Miss Sullivan," Matthew said, and the intensity was back in his eyes. "When can we start?" They agreed on early mornings before the heat of the day, before Matthew needed to be at the corrals where he worked. Katherine quoted him a price for lessons that was modest but fair, expecting him to negotiate or reconsider. Instead, he pulled coins from his pocket and paid her for the first month without hesitation. "Tomorrow morning, then," Katherine said, still slightly bewildered by the turn her day had taken. "Come at dawn." Matthew nodded, settling his hat back on his head. He paused at the door, looking back at her with that same searching expression. "Thank you, Miss Sullivan. I know this is odd, but I appreciate you taking a chance." After he left, Katherine stood in her empty shop, her hands tingling strangely as though they remembered his gaze upon them. She shook her head at her own foolishness. He was simply a customer, someone wanting to learn a new skill. There was nothing more to it than that. But that night, as she lay in her boarding house bed, Katherine found herself thinking about amber eyes and rough hands and a voice saying, "I would like to learn how to create something." Matthew arrived the next morning just as the first light was breaking over the mountains, turning the sky shades of pink and gold that would have been impossible to capture in glaze. Katherine had been up for an hour already, preparing the clay and setting up her wheel in a position where he could watch her work. He looked freshly washed, his hair still damp, wearing clean if worn work clothes. There was something endearing about the effort he had clearly made, and Katherine found herself smiling despite her nervousness about teaching. "Have you ever worked with clay before?" she asked, gesturing for him to come closer to the wheel. "Not since I was a kid playing in mud puddles," Matthew admitted with a sheepish grin that transformed his serious face into something younger and lighter. "Then we start at the beginning," Katherine said. She showed him the clay, how to test its consistency, how to knead it to remove air bubbles that could cause pieces to crack during firing. Matthew watched with fierce attention, his eyes tracking every movement of her hands. When it came time for him to try, his hands were clumsy at first, too rough and uncertain. But Katherine could see that he had good instincts, the same awareness of touch and pressure that made him good with horses. His hands might not know clay yet, but they knew how to listen to what they were working with. "Gentler," Katherine instructed, standing beside him as he attempted to knead the clay. "You have to be firm enough to work it, but gentle enough not to tear it, like convincing rather than forcing." Matthew adjusted his pressure, and she saw understanding dawn on his face. "Like with a green horse," he said. "You have got to be clear about what you want, but not so harsh they panic." "Exactly," Katherine said, pleased that he was finding connections to his own knowledge. They worked for 2 hours that first morning, and Katherine was surprised by how quickly the time passed. Matthew proved to be a dedicated student, asking thoughtful questions and practicing each technique she showed him with determined focus. He had large hands, scarred and calloused from rope and reins, but they moved across the clay with increasing confidence. When the church bells rang 8 times, signaling the proper start of the business day, Matthew reluctantly cleaned the clay from his hands and prepared to leave for his own work. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked, and Katherine found herself nodding, already looking forward to it in a way that had nothing to do with the teaching fee. This pattern continued through the following weeks. Matthew arrived each dawn, and they worked together in the quiet morning hours while Empire City slowly woke around them. Katherine learned that he had come west from Missouri 5 years ago, following the promise of work and freedom after his father died, and the family farm had to be sold. He had a natural way with horses that had built him a solid reputation among the ranchers, but there was a restlessness in him, a need for something more that he struggled to articulate. "I guess I got tired of being alone all the time," he said one morning as he practiced centering clay on the wheel, his foot maintaining steady pressure on the pedal while his hands coaxed the spinning clay into alignment. "Working horses is solitary work mostly. You and the animal, nobody else. I started to feel like I was forgetting how to be around people, how to make something that connected me to others. Katherine understood that feeling more than she wanted to admit. Her own craft had often been a solitary pursuit, hours spent at the wheel with only her thoughts for company. "Pottery connects you to people," she said softly. "Every piece finds its way into someone's home, becomes part of their daily life. They drink their morning coffee from a mug you made, eat dinner from plates your hands shaped. It is intimate in a way, even when you never meet the person using it." Matthew looked up at her, his hands stilling on the clay. "Is that why you do it?" "For that connection, partly," Katherine admitted, "but also because there is something magical about taking earth and water and fire and creating something that did not exist before. My grandmother used to say that potters were the closest thing to alchemists, turning base materials into treasures." "Your grandmother taught you?" Matthew asked, returning his attention to the clay but continuing to listen. "She did. From the time I was 8 until she died 3 years ago. She was the one who believed I could make a life from this craft, who encouraged me to come west and start fresh." Katherine smiled at the memory, bittersweet as it was. "She would have liked you, I think. She always said the best potters were people who understood that you have to work with the clay's nature, not against it." "Like working with a horse's nature," Matthew said again, and Katherine laughed. "Yes, exactly like that." As July turned to August, Matthew's skills improved dramatically. He could center clay consistently now, and had begun to pull his first simple bowls. They were uneven and thick-walled, beginner's work, but there was something solid and honest about them that pleased Katherine. More than that, she could see his growing confidence, the way his shoulders relaxed as he worked, how his rough hands developed a new kind of sureness. But it was more than just teaching happening in those morning hours, though Katherine tried to ignore it at first. There was the way Matthew smiled when she praised his progress, how he always asked about her day when he arrived, the careful way he cleaned up after himself without being asked, respecting her space and tools. There was the morning he brought her coffee from the hotel, remembering that she took it with cream and just a touch of sugar. There was the afternoon he showed up at her shop after his own work was done, carrying lumber he had somehow acquired, offering to build her a proper storage system for her clay. "You did not have to do this," Katherine protested, though she was already imagining how much easier it would make her work. "I wanted to," Matthew said simply, setting down the wood and pulling out the measuring tape from his pocket. "You are teaching me something valuable. Let me give something back." He worked for 3 evenings building her storage system, refusing payment, accepting only a simple dinner she brought from Mrs. Henderson's kitchen. They talked while he worked about his life and hers, about the dreams that had brought them both west, about the strange loneliness of being surrounded by people yet feeling fundamentally alone. "I had a fiancé back in Ohio," Katherine found herself admitting one evening as she watched Matthew sand a rough edge smooth. "He said he loved me, but what he really loved was the idea of a wife who would give up her own dreams to support his. When I would not stop my pottery work to focus solely on household preparations, he called me selfish and broke the engagement." Matthew's hands stilled on the wood. "Then he was a fool who did not deserve you." The certainty in his voice made Katherine's heart skip. "How can you say that? You barely know me. I know that you traveled halfway across a country by yourself to pursue something you believe in," Matthew said, looking up at her with those amber eyes. "I know that you are patient enough to teach a rough cowboy like me without ever making me feel stupid for not knowing something. I know that your hands create beautiful things, and that you light up when you talk about your craft. That is enough to know that any man who wanted you to be less than you are was a fool." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes, unexpected and unwelcome. She blinked them away quickly, but not quickly enough. Matthew was on his feet in an instant, his expression concerned. "I am sorry," she said, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I do not know why I am crying. What you said was kind, that is all. It has been a long time since anyone saw me as anything more than odd for wanting this life." "You are not odd," Matthew said firmly. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently wiped a remaining tear from her cheek with his thumb. His hand was rough but warm, and Katherine found herself leaning into the touch before she could stop herself. "You are extraordinary." They stood there for a moment that stretched like pulled clay, thin and precarious and holding something precious between them. Then Matthew stepped back, clearing his throat, returning to his work with perhaps more focus than the simple sanding required. Katherine went back to glazing a set of plates, but her hands trembled slightly, and she had to set down her brush to steady herself. Something had shifted between them, some line had been crossed, and she did not know whether to be terrified or thrilled. That night, Mrs. Henderson caught Katherine staring dreamily into her dinner stew and gave her a knowing look. "That O'Brien boy has been spending a lot of time at your shop," the older woman said casually, passing the bread basket. "He is taking pottery lessons," Katherine replied, trying to sound professional and failing utterly. "Hum," Mrs. Henderson hummed, not fooled in the slightest. "Well, he is a good man from what I hear. Honest, hard worker, does not drink to excess or gamble away his wages." "Could do worse for yourself, dear, Mrs. Henderson," Katherine protested, her face flaming. "He is just a student." "If you say so, dear," the landlady said with a smile that suggested she knew better. August brought hot wines down from the mountains, and a steady stream of customers to Katherine's shop. Word of her pottery had spread through Empire City and the surrounding ranches, and she found herself taking custom orders for dinnerware sets, decorative vases, and special pieces. The miner whose wife missed pretty things became a regular customer, as did several ranch wives who were delighted to have something beautiful to grace their rough homes. The money was not abundant, but it was steady, and Katherine began to believe that she could actually sustain herself through her craft. She worked long hours, rising before dawn for Matthew's lessons, then spending her days throwing and trimming and glazing, firing her kiln every few days, managing customers and orders and the 1,000 small tasks that came with running a business. Matthew continued his lessons religiously, never missing a morning despite his own demanding work schedule. His skills had progressed to where he could throw consistent bowls and simple vases. Katherine taught him about glazing, about the alchemy of minerals and heat that transformed dull surfaces into glossy colors. He was fascinated by every aspect of the craft, asking questions that showed real understanding of the principles involved. But the lessons had become something more than just instruction. They were the best part of Katherine's day, those quiet morning hours when it was just the two of them, clay spinning between their hands, soft conversation flowing as easily as water. Matthew had a way of listening that made Katherine feel heard, truly heard, perhaps for the first time in her life. And she found herself watching him when he was focused on his work, admiring the concentration on his face, the growing confidence in his movements, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled at a successfully completed piece. One morning in late August, Matthew arrived with a determined expression that Katherine had learned meant he had been thinking hard about something. "I want to make something specific," he announced, setting down his hat. "Not just practice pieces, something with purpose." "What did you have in mind?" Katherine asked, intrigued. "A set of mugs," Matthew said. "4 of them matching. For my foreman and his family. His wife has been kind to me, always making sure I am fed and looked after, and they have got 2 kids who are good youngsters. I want to give them something to show my appreciation, something I made with my own hands." Katherine felt warmth spread through her chest. "That is a lovely idea, Matthew. Let us get started." They worked together over the next week, Matthew throwing the mugs with Katherine's guidance. They were not perfect, slightly uneven in height and thickness, with handles that were a bit clumsy, but they had character and heart. Katherine helped him choose a glaze, a warm brown that would hide imperfections while bringing out the handmade quality of the pieces. When the mugs came out of the final firing, Matthew held them with almost reverent care. "They are not as fine as your work," he said quietly. "They are better," Katherine corrected gently, "because you made them with love and gratitude. That is worth more than perfect symmetry." Matthew looked at her then with such warmth in his eyes that Katherine felt her breath catch. "You have got a gift for seeing the good in things," he said softly. "Or maybe you just bring out the best in what you touch," Katherine replied before she could stop herself. The air between them felt charged, like the moments before a summer storm. Matthew set down the mugs carefully and took a step closer to Katherine. She could see the pulse beating at his throat, could smell the clean scent of soap and leather and something uniquely him. "Katherine," he said, her name rough in his mouth like an endearment. "I need to tell you something." She nodded, not trusting her voice. "I did not really come here just to learn pottery," Matthew admitted. "I mean, I do love learning it, that part is true and has become more important to me than I can say. But that first day I saw you in the window, it was not the clay that caught my attention. It was you. The way you moved, the focus on your face, the beauty of creation in your hands. I thought I have never seen anything so perfect in my life, and I knew I needed to know you, needed to find a reason to be near you." Katherine's heart was pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. "So the lessons were just an excuse." "They were at first," Matthew said honestly. "But they became real, became important in their own right. You have taught me something about myself, Katherine. You have shown me that I can be more than just a man who breaks horses, that I can create and build and make something meaningful. You have shaped me like you shape clay, gently and patiently, until I could become something better than I was." "Matthew," Katherine whispered, and then his hands were cupping her face, rough and gentle all at once, and he was asking with his eyes for permission she gave with the slightest nod. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, 2 people discovering something new and precious. Then it deepened, Matthew's arms coming around her waist, Katherine's hands sliding up to his shoulders, and it felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Matthew rested his forehead against hers. "I am in love with you," he said simply. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other 2 months, but I am certain of this like I have never been certain of anything. I love you, Katherine Sullivan." "I love you too," Katherine replied, the words flowing out as naturally as water, as inevitable as clay taking shape beneath a potter's hands. "I think I have loved you since you asked me to teach you, since you stood in my shop and said you wanted to create instead of break." Matthew kissed her again, and Katherine felt the last of her reservations crumble away. This was right. This was meant to be. This man with his honest eyes and gentle hands and restless heart was hers, and she was his, and everything else would fall into place around that central truth. They stood there in the back room of Katherine's shop, surrounded by shelves of pottery and bags of clay and the tools of her trade, holding each other as the morning light grew stronger and Empire City came fully to life around them. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling like fools, giddy with the joy of acknowledged love. "People are going to talk," Katherine said. though she did not sound particularly concerned about it. "Let them," Matthew replied, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I am not hiding how I feel about you. I want everyone in Empire City to know that you are mine and I am yours." "Yours," Katherine repeated, testing the word and finding it perfect. "I like the sound of that." "Speaking of which," Matthew said, suddenly nervous again, "I need to ask you something properly." He took both of her hands in his, and Catherine's heart began racing again. "Katherine Sullivan, I know I do not have much," Matthew began. "I've got some savings, a decent reputation with horses, and a rented room above the livery. But I am a hard worker, and I will do everything in my power to give you a good life, to support your craft and your dreams. Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my days watching your hands shape clay and our future together?" The echo of his words from that first day, about asking her hands to shape his future, brought tears to Catherine's eyes, happy ones this time. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Matthew O'Brien, I will marry you." Matthew let out a whoop of joy that startled Katherine into laughter. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing like children, dizzy with happiness and hope. When he set her down, they were both grinning so wide their faces hurt. "How soon?" Matthew asked. "How soon can we marry?" "There is a waiting period for the license, I think," Katherine said, trying to remember the practical details through the haze of joy. "But not long. A few weeks perhaps." "Good," Matthew said firmly. "I do not want to wait any longer than necessary." They spent the rest of the morning planning in between kisses and declarations of love that neither could seem to stop making. Matthew would need to find them proper housing, something better than his room above the livery or Catherine's rented space at Mrs. Henderson's. Katherine would need to adjust her shop hours and figure out how to manage the business while building a life with Matthew. There were 1,000 details to consider, but all of them seemed manageable with Matthew's hand in hers. When Matthew finally had to leave for his work with the horses, he kissed Katherine one more time at the door of her shop, not caring who might see. "I will be back this evening," he promised. "We can go to dinner at the hotel, let people see us together, make it official." "I would like that," Katherine said, touching his face gently, still marveling that she was allowed to do so. After he left, Katherine floated through her work, barely able to concentrate on the piece she was meant to be trimming. Mrs. Henderson had been right, of course. Katherine had been falling in love with Matthew O'Brien since the moment he walked into her shop asking to learn, asking her hands to shape his future along with the clay. That evening, dressed in her best dress with her hair arranged carefully, Katherine met Matthew at the hotel dining room. He wore clean clothes and had clearly taken care with his appearance, his hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaved. He stood when she entered, his face lighting up at the sight of her, and offered his arm with such pride that Katherine felt herself blushing. They ate dinner together, talking and laughing, oblivious to the curious looks from other diners. When the meal was finished, Matthew walked Katherine back to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, holding her hand openly, making no secret of their courtship. At the door, Katherine invited him to sit on the porch swing, not ready for the evening to end. They sat close together, Matthew's arm around her shoulders, Katherine's head resting against his chest where she could hear his heartbeat, steady and strong. "Tell me about your family," Katherine said softly. "I want to know everything about you." Matthew was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "My father was a farmer in Missouri, good man but hard, the way farmers have to be to survive. My mother died when I was 12, fever took her fast. After that, it was just me and my father and my younger brother Samuel. We worked the farm, barely making ends meet most years. When father died 5 years ago, the debts were more than we could manage. Samuel went to work in a factory back east, and I came west. We write when we can, but it has been near 2 years since I last saw him. Do you miss him? Katherine asked. Every day, Matthew admitted. But Samuel has got his own life now, married last year to a girl from Pennsylvania. I am happy for him, but I always thought my family would be the people I grew up with. Now I realize family is also the people you choose, the people who choose you back. Katherine squeezed his hand. Maybe Samuel could visit someday, meet your wife. I would like that, Matthew said, kissing the top of her head. What about your family? Anyone back in Ohio we should write to with the news? Katherine sighed softly. My parents died within a year of each other when I was 17, influenza. After that, it was just my grandmother and me until she passed. I have some cousins scattered around, but we were never close. My former fiancé's family was not pleased when I broke off the engagement, so those bridges are thoroughly burned. No, my family now is what I make of it, just like you said. Then we will make our own family, Matthew said firmly. You and me and whoever else we add along the way, we will build something good together, Katherine, something that lasts. They sat on that porch swing until the stars came out, talking about their plans and dreams, about the life they would build together in this mountain town so far from where either of them had started. When Matthew finally kissed her goodnight and headed back to his room above the livery, Katherine went inside feeling like the luckiest woman in Colorado. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation and pure happiness. Matthew filed for a marriage license at the courthouse, charming the clerk with his obvious excitement. Katherine wrote to Samuel, introducing herself and inviting him to the wedding if he could possibly make the journey. She also told Mrs. Henderson the news, and the landlady was thrilled, immediately offering to host a small celebration after the ceremony. Matthew found them a small house for rent on the edge of town, a 2-room cabin with a potbelly stove and a view of the mountains. It was not much, but it had a shed behind it where Katherine could set up her kiln and wheel, allowing her to work from home while still maintaining her shop in town for sales and customer orders. The rent was manageable between their 2 incomes, and Matthew had already started planning improvements he could make: a proper porch, a garden space for Katherine, a workshop area where he could continue practicing his pottery. You are still planning to keep up with the craft? Katherine asked, pleased but surprised. Of course, Matthew said, looking at her like she had asked whether he planned to keep breathing. It is part of me now, Katherine. You put that there and I do not want to lose it. They set their wedding date for September 15th, just 3 weeks after Matthew's proposal. It would be a simple ceremony at the small church in town, with Mrs. Henderson and her household, Matthew's foreman and his family, and a few of the regular customers Katherine had befriended. Katherine sewed herself a new dress in cream-colored cotton with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs, and Matthew purchased a new suit from the general store, the finest clothes he had ever owned. The night before the wedding, Katherine worked late in her shop, finishing a special piece she had been making in secret. It was a large bowl, wider and deeper than anything she typically created, glazed in swirling shades of brown and gold and green that reminded her of Matthew's eyes and the mountains and the earth itself. On the interior, she had carved their initials and the date, a permanent record of this moment when their lives were joining together. She was just placing it carefully on the shelf to cool when someone knocked on her shop door. Surprised, since it was well past closing time, Katherine opened it to find Matthew standing there, looking nervous and holding something wrapped in cloth. I know we are not supposed to see each other the night before the wedding, he said quickly, but I could not wait to give you this. Katherine smiled and pulled him inside. I do not believe in those superstitions anyway. Come in." Matthew unwrapped the cloth to reveal a wooden box, clearly handmade with careful joints and a smooth finish. "I made this for you," he said, handing it to her. "For storing your most precious tools or whatever you want, really. I know it is not much, but I wanted you to have something I created with my own hands, the way you have created so much for me." Katherine ran her fingers over the smooth wood, noting the care that had gone into every detail. She opened the lid to find the interior lined with soft cloth, perfect for protecting delicate items. "Matthew, this is beautiful. I will treasure it always." "There is more," he said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small folded paper. "I wrote something for you. I am not good with fancy words, but I wanted you to know how I feel." Katherine unfolded the paper, moving closer to the lamp to read the rough handwriting. "Katherine, you asked me once why I wanted to learn pottery, and I told you about wanting to create instead of break. That was true, but it was not the whole truth. The whole truth is that I saw in you something I have been searching for my entire life without knowing what I was looking for. You move through the world with such purpose and grace, shaping your own destiny with those talented hands, and I wanted to be part of that. Wanted to learn how to shape my own destiny instead of just letting life break me down. You have taught me that I can be more than I thought I was, that I can create beauty and meaning, that I can love and be loved in return. Tomorrow, when we marry, I am not just gaining a wife. I am becoming the man I was always meant to be, and I could not have become that man without you. I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the faith you have placed in me, trying to create a life with you that is as beautiful as the pottery you make. I love you more than words can say, but I wanted to try to say it anyway. Matthew." Katherine's eyes were blurred with tears by the time she finished reading. She set down the paper carefully and threw her arms around Matthew's neck, holding him tight. "I love you," she whispered fiercely. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." Matthew held her close, his face buried in her hair. "I know. I feel the same way, but we will be scared together, and somehow that makes it less frightening." They stood there for a long moment, holding each other in the lamplight of the shop that had brought them together. Finally, Matthew pulled back, cupping Katherine's face in his hands. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "Let you get some rest before tomorrow, but I want you to know that I have never been more certain of anything than I am of us." "Neither have I," Katherine replied, kissing him softly. "I will see you at the church tomorrow." After Matthew left, Katherine carefully stored the wooden box and love letter with her most precious possessions. Then she retrieved the bowl she had made for him, wrapping it carefully for tomorrow. They would exchange these gifts after the ceremony, two people offering each other the work of their hands and the truth of their hearts. September 15th dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect late summer day that felt like a blessing. Katherine woke early, her stomach fluttering with nervous excitement. Mrs. Henderson helped her dress, arranging her hair in an elegant style and pinning a small cluster of wildflowers above her ear. "You look beautiful, dear," the older woman said, her eyes misty. "That young man of yours is not going to know what hit him." At the church, a simple white building with a bell tower, Katherine's small group of well-wishers gathered. The miners and their wives, the ranch families who bought her pottery, the livery boy who had helped her that first day in Empire City, and Mrs. Henderson with her household, all had come to witness the union. But Katherine barely saw any of them. Her eyes found Matthew immediately, standing at the front of the church in his new suit, looking more handsome than she had ever seen him and slightly terrified in the way of grooms throughout history. When he saw her walking down the aisle, his face transformed with such love and joy that Katherine felt her own nervousness disappear. This was right. This was exactly where she was meant to be. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, conducted by the circuit preacher who came through Empire City twice a month. Katherine and Matthew spoke their vows in clear, strong voices, promising to love and honor each other, to build a life together through whatever hardships and joys came their way. When Matthew slipped the simple gold band he had purchased onto Katherine's finger, his hand trembled slightly, but his voice was steady. "With this ring I thee wed," he said, his eyes locked on hers. "My hands to your hands, my heart to your heart, my future to our future." Katherine felt tears slip down her cheeks as she placed a matching band on his finger. "With this ring I thee wed," she repeated. "My hands to your hands, my heart to your heart, my life to our life." "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher said with a warm smile. "Matthew, you may kiss your bride." Matthew pulled Katherine close and kissed her thoroughly, not caring that they had an audience, and the small church erupted in applause and cheers. When they broke apart, both grinning, they turned to face their friends as Mr. and Mrs. O'Brien, and Katherine felt a surge of pure happiness so strong it was almost overwhelming. The celebration at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house was lively and warm, with food and drink and genuine affection. The foreman's wife gave Katherine a beautiful quilt she had sewn, and the miners chipped in to buy them a set of fine china that made Katherine both laugh and cry. Matthew's gift of the mugs he had made sat on display, and everyone admired them, telling him he had clearly found a fine teacher. When it was time for Katherine and Matthew to leave for their little cabin, their new home, the guests showered them with rice and good wishes. Matthew helped Katherine into the wagon he had borrowed for the occasion, their few combined possessions already loaded in the back, and they set off through Empire City as the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of fire. At the cabin, Matthew insisted on carrying Katherine over the threshold, and she laughed as he did so, both of them giddy with joy and the strange new reality of being married. Inside, someone, probably Mrs. Henderson, had left flowers in a jar on the table and stocked the kitchen with basic supplies to get them through the first few days. Matthew set Katherine down gently, and suddenly they were both shy, aware of the magnitude of the step they had taken. Katherine moved to light the lamps, needing something to do with her hands, while Matthew brought in their belongings from the wagon. "I have something for you," Katherine said finally, retrieving the wrapped bowl. "I made this for us, for our new life together." Matthew unwrapped it carefully, and his breath caught when he saw the beautiful glazing, the carved initials, the love and care evident in every aspect of the piece. "Katherine, this is incredible. I do not have words." "You already gave me words," Katherine said softly, thinking of his letter. "You gave me the most beautiful words I have ever received." Matthew set down the bowl and pulled Katherine into his arms. "I love you, Mrs. O'Brien," he said against her hair. "I love you, Mr. O'Brien," Katherine replied, and then they were kissing, and the rest of the world fell away entirely. Their first months of marriage were an adjustment, learning to share space and habits and the daily intimacies of life together. But it was also a time of deep joy, of waking up beside each other, of sharing meals and conversations and dreams for the future. Katherine continued her pottery work, now splitting her time between the shop in town and her home workshop. Matthew kept up his horse training while also dedicating time each week to his pottery practice, his skills steadily improving under Katherine's continued guidance. They fell into comfortable rhythms. Katherine would wake early to work the clay while the morning light was best, and Matthew would join her when his own work allowed, sitting at his wheel beside hers, two sets of hands shaping clay and future in tandem. In the evenings, They would cook dinner together, Matthew proving surprisingly capable in the kitchen, and afterward they would sit on their small porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, planning improvements to the cabin and the workshop, talking about everything and nothing. Winter came early to the Colorado mountains that year, snow arriving in late October and settling in for the long season. Katherine and Matthew spent cozy evenings by the stove, Katherine working on hand-building projects that did not require the wheel, Matthew carving designs into leather pieces he was making as Christmas gifts. The cabin was small but warm, and Katherine found she did not mind the close quarters, loved actually the way they were always within reach of each other. One evening in November, as snow fell softly outside and the stove kept them warm, Katherine set aside the mug she was decorating and looked at Matthew seriously. "I want to talk to you about something," she said, and Matthew immediately gave her his full attention, setting down his own work. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong," Katherine assured him quickly. "I have been thinking about the future, about our future together. We have talked about wanting children someday, and I wanted to know where you stand on that now." Matthew's face softened. "I want children with you, Katherine. I want to fill this cabin and our lives with family, but only when you are ready. I know your business is still growing, and I do not want you to feel pressured to give up your work." "What if I told you I do not have to give it up?" Katherine said slowly. "What if I could manage both, being a mother and a potter? Other women do it. It would be challenging, but I think with your support, I could make it work." Matthew moved to sit beside her, taking her hands in his. "You can do anything you set your mind to, Katherine. If you want to try for a baby now, I am ready. If you want to wait, I am patient. This is your decision as much as mine." Katherine squeezed his hands, grateful for his understanding. "I think I am ready. I think I want to start trying, see what happens. We have built a good foundation here, a good life. I want to add to it." Matthew kissed her softly, tenderly. "Then we will start trying," he said simply. "And whatever happens, whenever it happens, we will face it together." The winter passed peacefully, Katherine and Matthew settling deeper into their marriage, into the comfortable intimacy of shared life. They celebrated their first Christmas together, exchanging handmade gifts, Katherine giving Matthew a set of pottery tools she had forged specifically for his larger hands, Matthew giving Katherine the leather apron he had been working on, perfectly sized for her with pockets for her most used tools. January brought news from Samuel, Matthew's brother, a letter announcing that he and his wife were expecting their first child in the spring. Matthew was overjoyed at the prospect of becoming an uncle, and it renewed his hope that Samuel might someday make the journey west to meet Katherine and see the life Matthew had built. "Maybe after the baby is old enough to travel," Matthew said wistfully, reading the letter for the third time. "I would love for you to meet my brother and for him to see Empire City, see what we have here." "I hope he can come," Katherine said warmly. "Family is important, even when distance separates you." In February, Katherine realized her monthly courses had not come. She waited, not wanting to say anything until she was certain, but when another week passed and then another, she finally allowed herself to hope. She went to see the town doctor, a kindly older man named Dr. Morrison, who confirmed what she had begun to suspect. "You are with child, Mrs. O'Brien," he said with a gentle smile. "Early yet, maybe 6 or 7 weeks along, but definitely expecting. Congratulations." Katherine walked home in a daze of joy, her hand pressed to her still flat stomach, marveling at the life beginning there. She wanted to tell Matthew immediately, but also wanted to make the moment special, memorable. That evening, she set the table with the bowl she had made for their wedding, filling it with a simple stew. When Matthew came home from work, Cold and tired but smiling at the sight of her, Katherine pulled him inside and had him sit at the table. "I have news," she said, unable to keep the joy from her voice. Matthew's eyes widened. "Are you?" Katherine nodded, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "I am. We are going to have a baby." Matthew was out of his chair in an instant, pulling Katherine into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby," he kept repeating. "We are going to have a baby." They held each other for a long time, overwhelmed with emotion with the reality of this new chapter beginning. Finally, Matthew pulled back, his hands gently cupping Katherine's face. "Thank you," he said softly. "Thank you for this gift, for choosing this life with me, for being willing to bring a child into the world with me." "Thank you for being the kind of man I want to raise children with," Katherine replied. "For being patient and kind and supporting my dreams even as we build new ones together." The months that followed were filled with preparation and anticipation. Katherine continued her pottery work, though she had to adjust some of her techniques as her belly grew, finding it harder to lean over the wheel. Matthew built a cradle in the evenings, carving it carefully from pine and sanding it smooth. Mrs. Henderson and the ranch wives rallied around Katherine, bringing baby clothes and advice and offers of help. In late September, as autumn returned to the mountains and the aspen trees turned gold, Katherine went into labor. Dr. Morrison attended her, along with Mrs. Henderson and two experienced mothers from town. Matthew paced outside the cabin, too nervous to sit still, jumping at every sound from within. After 12 hours of hard labor, Katherine delivered a healthy baby boy. He came into the world squalling his displeasure at the cold air, his small fists waving, and Katherine fell instantly, completely in love. When Matthew was finally allowed inside, when he saw his wife exhausted but glowing and his son wrapped in a quilt and nursing at Katherine's breast, he wept openly. "He is perfect," Matthew whispered, carefully stroking the baby's downy head. "You are perfect. Thank you, Katherine. Thank you for him." They named him Samuel Matthew O'Brien, after Matthew's brother and in honor of the father the baby would hopefully grow to know. Little Samuel had his father's eyes and his mother's determined chin, and he was loved beyond measure from his very first breath. The first year of Samuel's life was exhausting but wonderful. Katherine learned to balance motherhood and her craft, working during the baby's naps, taking custom orders she could complete in stages, gradually building back her business. Matthew was a devoted father, coming home from work to immediately take Samuel, giving Katherine breaks to work or rest, walking the floor with his son during fussy evenings, singing to him in a surprisingly decent voice. Samuel Matthew O'Brien proved to be a happy, curious baby, fascinated by his mother's pottery wheel and his father's leather-working tools. Katherine would set him in a basket near her workspace, and he would watch her hands with the same intensity his father once had, as though even in infancy he recognized the magic of creation. When Samuel was 6 months old, a letter arrived from Missouri that made Matthew shout with joy. Samuel Sr. and his wife had decided to make the journey west after all, wanting to meet their nephew and see the life Matthew had built. They would arrive in June, staying for a month, and Matthew could hardly contain his excitement. Katherine threw herself into preparations, wanting to make a good impression on Matthew's only living family. She cleaned the cabin from top to bottom, despite Matthew's protests that his brother would not care about such things. She made sure they had enough bedding and food, planned meals that would showcase her skills even though Matthew insisted Samuel would be happy with beans and coffee. When the day finally came, Matthew rode out to meet the stagecoach, returning an hour later with a couple who looked as tired from travel as Katherine had been when she first arrived in Empire City. Samuel O'Brien Sr. was clearly Matthew's brother, with the same build and similar features, though his hair was darker and his face more weathered. His wife, Margaret, was a petite woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. The introductions were slightly awkward at first, everyone nervous and trying too hard, but little Samuel broke the ice by reaching his chubby arms toward his uncle and laughing delightedly. Samuel Sr. took his nephew with the ease of an experienced father, and any remaining tension dissolved. "He looks like you did as a baby," Samuel told his brother, bouncing young Samuel gently. "Same serious expression, like you are trying to figure out the world." Over the next month, the two families grew close. Samuel and Margaret told stories of Missouri and factory life, of their own son who was just a year older than his cousin. Matthew and Katherine showed them Empire City, introduced them to friends, brought them to the pottery shop where Samuel Sr. marveled at his brother's unexpected skill. "Never thought I would see the day when Matt O'Brien was making dishes," Samuel joked, examining a mug Matthew had recently finished. "Neither did I," Matthew admitted, his arm around Katherine's waist. "But your sister-in-law has a gift for teaching, and she convinced me I could be more than just a horse breaker." "She is good for you," Samuel said seriously, looking at Katherine with genuine affection. "I can see how happy you are, Matt. I am glad you found each other." The month passed too quickly, and when it came time for Samuel and Margaret to return east, there were tears and promises to write more often, hopes that they could visit again, or that Matthew and Katherine might someday make the journey to Missouri. Little Samuel cried when his uncle tried to hand him back, having grown attached to the man who shared his name, and that made everyone laugh through their tears. After they left, the cabin felt strangely empty despite being full again with just the three of them. But the visit had strengthened the bond between the brothers, and Katherine was grateful that young Samuel would grow up knowing his uncle and cousin, even if only through letters and occasional visits. The years passed in the way they do, when life is full and good. Young Samuel grew into a bright, energetic toddler, then a curious child who loved both his mother's pottery and his father's horses. Katherine's business continued to thrive, her reputation spreading beyond Empire City to other Colorado towns. Matthew's horse training skills remained in high demand, and he had begun to combine his two crafts, making pottery pieces specifically for the ranching community, water troughs and feed bowls and practical items with his own unique style. When Samuel was 3 years old, Katherine discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, and in the spring of Samuel's 4th year, she delivered a healthy baby girl they named Lily Elizabeth, after Katherine's grandmother. Lily was different from her brother from the start, quieter and more observant, with Katherine's auburn hair, and a temperament that suggested she would be thoughtful and careful. Samuel adored his baby sister immediately, constantly wanting to hold her and show her his treasures, rocks and sticks and other items he deemed important. Matthew had expanded the cabin over the years, adding 2 bedrooms and a larger kitchen, building a proper workshop separate from the house for Katherine's pottery and his leatherwork. They had purchased the property outright using their combined savings, and Matthew had plans to buy the adjacent land as well, dreaming of a small homestead where they could raise their children and perhaps take in horses for training. By the time Samuel was 7 and Lily was 3, Katherine had trained 2 young women in Empire City in the basics of pottery, allowing her to take on more custom work while also spending time with her children. Matthew had taken on an apprentice as well, a teenage boy who showed promise with horses and was eager to learn. They were building something that would last beyond themselves, creating a legacy of craft and skill. One evening in late summer, with the children asleep and the mountains glowing in the sunset, Katherine and Matthew sat on their porch, Matthew's arm around her shoulders, Katherine's head resting on his chest. "You remember the day we met?" Katherine asked softly. "When you came to my shop and asked me to teach you?" "Every detail," Matthew replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You were standing in the window, and I thought I had never seen anything so beautiful. I knew in that moment that you were going to change my life." "You changed mine too," Katherine said. "You asked my hands to shape your future, but you shaped mine just as much. Everything good in my life came from that moment when you walked through my door." Matthew tightened his arm around her. "We shaped it together, Katherine. Like clay on a wheel, both our hands guiding it, turning it into something neither of us could have made alone." "I love you," Katherine said simply, as she had said countless times over their years together, the words never losing their power or meaning. "I love you too," Matthew replied, as he always did, and they sat together watching the sun set over the mountains, content in the life they had built, the family they had created, the love that sustained them through all things. Samuel burst through the door then, supposedly asleep but clearly having sneaked out of bed. "Papa, can you tell me the story again, about how you met Mama?" Matthew laughed and pulled his son onto his lap. "Again, I told you twice this week already, but I like it," Samuel insisted. "It is the best story," Katherine smiled, reaching over to smooth her son's hair. "Why do you like it so much, sweetheart?" "Because Papa says Mama's hands could make anything," Samuel said seriously. "And I want to learn to do that too, make things that are beautiful and useful and special." "Then your mother and I will teach you," Matthew promised. "Just like she taught me, just like her grandmother taught her. We will pass it down, and someday you will teach your own children." Samuel nodded, satisfied with this answer, and after a bit more coaxing, allowed himself to be carried back to bed. When Matthew returned to the porch, Katherine was standing at the rail, looking out at the darkening mountains, and he came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "He is going to be just fine," Matthew murmured. "They both are. We are giving them everything we never had, roots and skills and the knowledge that they are loved beyond measure." "We are," Katherine agreed, leaning back against him. "We are giving them a good foundation." As the stars began to appear in the vast Colorado sky, Katherine thought about the journey that had brought her here, from Ohio to Empire City, from potter to wife and mother, from solitary woman to beloved member of a family. She thought about the day a cowboy had walked into her shop and asked to learn something he thought he could never do, about the way love had grown between them like a seedling reaching for sunlight, natural and inevitable and beautiful. She thought about her grandmother's words, that potters were like alchemists, turning base materials into treasures. But Katherine had learned that love was the truest alchemy, transforming two separate people into something unified and stronger than either could be alone. Her hands had shaped clay into art, but love had shaped them both into who they were meant to become. The years continued to unfold, bringing both joys and challenges as life always does. There were hard winters when money was tight and work was scarce, summers when drought made everything difficult, seasons of illness and worry. But through it all, Katherine and Matthew faced life as they had promised together, their hands joined and their hearts aligned. Samuel grew into a skilled potter, developing his own style that combined his mother's artistry with his father's practical sensibility. He opened his own shop when he was 20, moving to Denver but returning often to visit his parents and consult on techniques. Lily, quieter and more studious, surprised everyone by showing a gift for horses that rivaled her father's, and she spent her teenage years working alongside Matthew, developing a reputation for being able to gentle even the wildest animals. When Katherine was 40, she was invited to display her pottery at a territorial fair in Denver, a tremendous honor that recognized her years of dedication to the craft. Matthew insisted they all go, closing down the shops for a week to support Katherine's achievement. At the fair, her work won first prize in the ceramics category, and the territorial governor himself stopped by to compliment her pieces and inquire about commissions. That night, in their Denver hotel room, Katherine cried happy tears while Matthew held her, both of them marveling at how far they had come from that dusty day when a young woman with a wagon full of pottery had arrived in Empire City hoping to build a life. "Your grandmother would be so proud," Matthew whispered. "I wish she could have seen this, seen everything you have accomplished." "She knows," Katherine said with certainty. "Wherever she is, she knows, and she is smiling." By the time Katherine and Matthew celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary, they had both achieved success beyond what they had dreamed possible in those early days. Katherine's pottery was sold throughout Colorado and beyond, her distinctive style recognized and sought after. Matthew had built a horse training operation that employed 3 apprentices and served ranches across 2 territories. But their greatest success, they both agreed, was the family they had raised and the love they had maintained through 2 decades of life together. Samuel had married and given them 2 grandchildren. Lily had found love with a neighboring rancher's son, and their wedding was planned for the following spring. For their anniversary, Matthew and Katherine returned to the original small cabin that they had kept even after building a larger house on their expanded property. They spent the day there, just the 2 of them, cooking a simple meal and sitting at the old table where they had shared so many dinners in those early years. 20 years, Katherine marveled, looking at Matthew across the table. His hair was graying now at the temples, his face more lined, but his eyes were still the same amber color that had captured her attention all those years ago. "It seems like no time at all and also a lifetime." "The best lifetime," Matthew said, reaching across to take her hand, his touch still sending warmth through her after all these years. "Every single day with you has been a gift, Katherine. Even the hard days," Katherine teased gently. "The days when I was impossible and stubborn." "Especially those days," Matthew replied with a grin, "because even on our worst days, I never doubted that we would figure it out together. That is what marriage is it not? Figuring it out together, shaping a life the way you shape clay, adjusting and correcting and being patient until you get it right." Katherine stood and moved around the table to sit in Matthew's lap, something she had not done in years, both of them laughing at the familiarity and comfort of the gesture. She kissed him softly, a kiss that held 20 years of love and trust and shared life. "I would do it all again," she whispered against his lips. "Every moment, every choice that led me to you." "So would I," Matthew replied, holding her close. "1,000 times over I would choose you." They stayed in the cabin until sunset, talking and laughing and remembering, grateful for what they had built and excited for what was still to come. The mountains stood eternal around them, witnesses to their love story, to the life they had carved out of Colorado wilderness and eastern clay and stubborn determination. As they finally prepared to return to their main house where family would be gathering for an anniversary dinner, Katherine paused at the door of the cabin, looking back at the space where their life together had truly begun. She thought about the woman she had been at 22, brave but uncertain, armed with nothing but skill and hope. She thought about the man Matthew had been, searching for something he could not name until he found it in her. "Thank you," she said softly, and Matthew knew she was thanking him for everything, for seeing her hands and asking them to shape not just his future but their future together. "Thank you," he replied, understanding perfectly. "For teaching me, for loving me, for building this beautiful life with me." They walked hand in hand through the twilight, back to the house where their family waited, where dinner would be loud and joyful and full of love. Behind them, the little cabin stood quiet and peaceful, holding the memories of two people who had found each other against all odds and built something that would last through all their days. Katherine Sullivan O'Brien and Matthew O'Brien would live many more years together, growing old side by side, welcoming more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren, continuing their crafts until their hands were too stiff and tired to work clay and leather. They would face losses and celebrate victories, weather storms both literal and metaphorical, and through it all, they would hold fast to the love that had sustained them from the beginning. When Katherine finally passed at the age of 78, Matthew was holding her hand, and her last words to him were, "I would choose you again." He followed her just 6 months later, unable to imagine a world without his Katherine in it, and they were buried side by side in the Empire City Cemetery, their shared headstone carved with pottery designs, and the words "Together they shaped a life." Their children and grandchildren would continue the pottery tradition, passing down Katherine's techniques and philosophy through generations. The original shop in Empire City would eventually become a studio and gallery run by their great-granddaughter, who had her great-grandmother's auburn hair and skilled hands. And visitors to the gallery would hear the story of how it all began, of a young woman who came west with nothing but clay and courage, and a cowboy who watched her hands and asked them to shape his future. It was a love story for the ages, simple and profound, built on mutual respect and shared dreams and the revolutionary idea that two people could create something together more beautiful than anything they could make alone. And in the end, that was Katherine and Matthew's greatest work of art, not the pottery or the horse training or even the family they raised, but the love itself, shaped with patient hands and faithful hearts, enduring long after the clay had returned to dust and the mountain winds had blown away their names. But their story would live on, passed down through generations, inspiring others to believe in the transformative power of love and work and dedication. Because Katherine and Matthew proved that ordinary people could build extraordinary lives, that hands trained to shape clay could also shape destiny, that a chance meeting in a dusty Colorado town could become a legacy that outlasted mortality itself. And somewhere in the eternal mountains, in the whisper of wind through aspen leaves, in the turning of a potter's wheel and the gentle handling of a nervous horse, in every act of creation and love and partnership, Katherine and Matthew's spirits lived on, forever shaping the future together, forever intertwined, forever home in each other's hearts.